Hello, boys and ghouls. Welcome to a very special interview episode of Tales From The Crypt. Today, I'm interviewing writer, director, producer, all-around great guy, Bob Gale. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be here.
Let's dive into some background. What's the first movie you remember seeing?
The first movie would have been a Disney movie, and it was either Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, which was the feature that Disney made from 2 or 3 episodes of the TV series, or it could have been Disney's Peter Pan. It was one of those two.
Mm-hmm. And then what were your earliest, or what would you consider your horror or cinematic influences?
They're two different things, of course.
Right.
Like all young boys, I was always interested in monsters and horror, and they had the local TV station ran monster movies after school. So, you ran home to watch some terrible B movie, or every once in a while they snuck a good one in there. And, this was the 50s. It was the heyday of Roger Corman. I remember going to see Invasion of the Saucermen. That was the one where the aliens came down to a drive-in movie theater, and their weakness was the sound of car horns. So everybody in the parking lot banged on their horns, and that's why the aliens lost.
Wow. So that movie like 5 minutes long?
Oh, God. All those things were padded. You've seen enough of those things. And of course, the movie that scared the hell out of me the most, probably, I saw it on TV, was the original Invaders from Mars.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the idea, when you're a little kid, and the idea that your parents are not really your parents, that's very, very creepy. So that definitely was something that fried my brain. I started reading comic books when I was probably 7 years old or so, starting with Harvey Comics and Disney Comics, and then moving into DC, and then Marvel by the time I was in high school. And we knew about all the great EC comics. I think there was some hardback collection that came out in the late 60s or the early 70s. But I was friends with a group of guys that were into comics. And every once in a while, somebody would unearth an issue of Tales from the Crypt or the Vault of Horror, or one of the great science fiction comics, incredible science weird science. And we devoured those things because, even at that age, you knew that the quality, the artwork, it was just so much better than the other stuff that you were seeing.
Mm-hmm. We'll get into your love of comics in a minute. But how did you get into filmmaking?
I always liked storytelling. So creative writing was always a passion for me. Mm-hmm. I say Disney, the great Disney animated movies had a profound effect on me. And I actually remember telling kids when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade that when I grow up, I'm going to go to Hollywood and work for Walt Disney. I picked up a movie camera in 11th grade, 12th grade. And the first thing that we did, my friends and I, we made a spoof of the old Commando Cody Rocketman movie serials, which were, a huge influence on our childhood. And ever the producer, our friends would see us run around with the camera, and they'd go, "Hey, you guys are making a movie. Can I be in it?" And I'd say, "Well, sure, but you have to pay to be in it because film is expensive, and we need to pay for the film that you're going to be in." And they'd say, "Okay." So,
You're kickstarting.
it's it's a business model that doesn't work in Hollywood, but um, it kind of works. It kind of works in Broadway, where they just get all these different investors, and they're just happy to be part of it, whether the show works or not.
And then you went to USC.
Yes, well, actually, so I'm making movies in high school and having a great time, and of course, I'm growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. And, you go to career day and there is not somebody there from Warner Brothers telling you, hey, kid, you could have a future in the movie business. Um, so I was good in math and I was good in science. So, the guidance people said, well, then you should go into engineering since you're so good in that stuff. And I was good in other stuff too, but they said, we need engineers, so you should go to engineering school. My grades were good enough to get in anywhere I wanted. My parents were cool about saying, yeah, you can go away to school, but it's got to be within a 600-mile radius of St. Louis. And I said, okay. New Orleans is within 600 miles of St. Louis, and I always want to see the Mardi Gras. So, uh, and the drinking age was only 18.
Right.
So I applied to Tulane and I got in. And I spent my freshman year at engineering school at Tulane. Now, there was a guy in my dormitory. His name is Ron Weinberg, who's from Great Neck, New York, and he was also an amateur filmmaker. And he was in engineering too, and didn't take to it any better than I did. And he said, "Hey, Gale, they got film schools in California, and if you make your hobby into your career, it won't feel like you're going to work every day." Now, this was like visionary advice that, nobody that wears a tie in high school is ever going to tell you. But I said, wow, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. So I wrote away to USC and UCLA and I got their catalogs and I'm reading the course descriptions, and all this stuff sounded a whole lot more interesting than organic chemistry. So I couldn't get into UCLA because I was from out of state, but I did get into USC. And again, my parents were very cool about it. They didn't think that there was any snowball's chance in hell I had of making it in the movie business. But the fact that this was, the University of Southern California, and I was going to leave the program with a Bachelor of Arts in cinema. It was a real college, and they said, "Okay, get it out of your system," and I didn't.
So here's the question: did you make it to Mardi Gras while you're at Tulane, or did you
Hell
leave before then?
yes!
Okay.
Oh my God, yeah. There were parades every night. Lots of us were going down to Canal Street and watching these parades all the time. It was a blast.
I'm just thinking about Easy Rider now.
Yes, of course. Of course.
All right. So you get to USC, you start taking your classes, and when did you meet Bob Z?
I met Bob Z in my junior year because the USC cinema program was a 2-year program. I took some kind of introductory cinema class in my sophomore year, but it really began in the junior year. And Zemeckis had gone to Northern Illinois University for his freshman and sophomore years, and he'd submitted a film that he made, and they loved it at USC, and he got a scholarship. Our first day in our filmmaking class, at that time we had 47 students in our class. That was it, and 80% of them were graduate students. So naturally the undergrads kind of gravitated towards each other, and we want to make Hollywood movies. And the graduate students have their veneer of sophistication, and they're talking about the greatness of Jean-Luc Godard and the French New Wave, and Bob Zemeckis and I and some of these other guys were talking about you know Dirty Harry and James Bond. That was what we were interested in.
All right. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit chronologically to your Tales from the Crypt episode. I want to get that up front.
Okay.
So, I'm assuming you were like kind of in the orbit of
Yes,
the
yeah, because
series.
I knew obviously Bob Zemeckis and I were friends, and I kind of had a love-hate relationship with Joel Silver, which is, I think, the only kind of relationship you can have with him. Um, uh, and really, kind of the catalyst on all this, believe it or not, was Walter Hill, because um, Walter directed a script that Bob and I wrote called Trespass, and I was one of the executive producers on it. So I'd go down to the location and keep an eye on it. And I got along with Walter great. There there are not enough superlatives in the English language to describe Walter Hill, in my opinion. And
Real quick, did
go
you
ahead.
read the book that just came out about him? Our friend
No, no.
David worked with the author Wayne, and Wayne wrote a
Oh,
book about.
that's right. I knew Wayne was writing it. I didn't know that the book finally got into print.
Mhm.
Okay, I will have to get my hands on it then. Yeah, great. Um, so Walter said to me, he said, Gale, you should be directing. You got a good sense of stuff, because I'd be there looking at how Walter set up a shot, and I'd kind of say, Walter, what if he went in this way or did something? And I've got my both my writer's hat on and my visual storytelling sense on. And he said, we get back after this is over, I'm gonna make a big push for you to direct an episode of Tales from the Crypt.
Mm.
I said, fantastic, fantastic. So my recollection is that Gil Adler and Alan Katz, they may have given me several stories to look at to pick which one I wanted to adapt. And the one that I picked was called House of Horror, which was a haunted house story with a fraternity spin on it. And I thought, okay, I could have a lot of fun with this.
Right.
And they said, great, write something, do it. And I don't remember there being any problems with the script that I came up with. Um, I think the I think the version of the story that I told is a little bit better than what was in the comics, because the story in the comic books doesn't really have have a hard ending. It's just kind of one, the crypt keeper comes out and says, "Well, we'll have to speculate on what happened to those boys inside of that
Right.
house."
Yeah, as with a lot of those stories, they tend to be a little on the flimsy side. At least if you're going to adapt it to a half-hour TV show, they're usually pretty straightforward because they only have like 6 pages to work with.
Right, right.
So what was in kind of in your mind as you're thinking about how can I expand this? Were you thinking like Animal House, Revenge of the Nerds meets Demons?
Well, yeah, Animal House was, of course, certainly, if you're talking about fraternity, can't not think about Animal House, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I had actually been a fraternity pledge back when I was at Tulane, so
Okay.
I had I bailed on it, but um, I at least had I at least had some personal knowledge of the of how all that stuff worked. So um,
What house did you pledge?
Tau Epsilon Phi.
I was an A pie back in my day, and I was a pledge master for
Oh,
full
really?
transparency. So I thought I love this episode partly because of that.
They liked it because it was all, they didn't have to go looking out for some big star to be in it.
Hmm.
And so I ended up with a really good cast of young up and coming actors.
Oh yeah,
And of course they wanted as much sex and violence in it as possible. Uh, I was able to do more with the violence aspect than the sex, but that was fine with them. And so this was all good. Rick Boda, the pho- director of photography, uh, he was terrific. He was really helpful in helping me figure out some of the shots that we could do. And the house that we used was way out near Magic Mountain. It was in Valencia, and it was built for a Dan Aykroyd movie called Git. At least that was the working title of it.
I think it was
Uh,
Nothing But Trouble.
maybe
Yeah.
yeah, the script was called GIT, but yeah, they must have changed it.
At least
Anyway,
when I talked to Keith Coogan, he said that's what it was.
oh, all right. Actually, I saw Keith for the first time in a long time over the summer.
Yeah.
We were at a comic convention in the UK together. Yeah, wonderful man.
Yeah, he
Um,
talked about that. He was very impressed that you remembered him, and he said how much you enjoyed your first directorial venture.
he was great. They were all good. They were all good.
Oh, it's an
And
amazing cast. My question is, how did you wrangle all these young actors? So it seems like these guys must have got rowdy.
well, it wasn't hard at all, actually, because they all wanted to be there. I mean, at that time, it was a badge of honor to be able to be in a Tales from the Crypt episode.
Mm.
It was, it was an easy gig because they were all shot in 5 days, and um, okay, you couldn't pay them the amount of money they would get in a feature. That's okay. It's only 5 days, and I get to be on Tales from the Crypt. So there was definitely a cachet and a badge of honor that you got for being in one. And so what would invariably happen, at least my recollection was, um, somebody would, I'd cast somebody or I'd see somebody, and all these young actors know each other. All actors of a certain age group always know each
Mm.
other. So I say, hey, you know, you should go up for this thing. It looks like it ought to be fun. And of course, Courtney Gaines, he was in he was in Back to the Future, so I already knew him. So I said, okay, yeah, I got to put Courtney in this. Now the most interesting thing that happened on that shoot involved Kevin Dillon. I mean, Kevin, he completely eats the scenery in that show,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's just great. He is just great. Well, Kevin, unbeknownst to anybody, he had like six speeding tickets. He lives in New Jersey, so he had six speeding tickets uh, in in California, and he didn't pay him because he was going back to New Jersey. Well, so when he was driving home from a rehearsal, um, he gets pulled over for speeding, or maybe it was actually, I think, the second day, the first day of shooting. He's driving home and he's speeding on Interstate 5, and the cops pull him over and they find out he's got all these speeding tickets. So they're not going to let him go. They put him in jail.
Oh
So
no.
I get a call early the next morning because we're shooting late into the night. I get a call from Bill Adler. He says Bob, and also it was raining as I remember, so that threw a big crimp in our shooting schedule. He said, Bob, I hope you're sitting down. Your lead actor's in jail. And, I responded with the appropriate expletives. And he said, don't worry, we've got everybody from HBO, all the lawyers, they're going to get him out. They're going to get him out. But we don't know when he's going to get out. So you need to rework your shot list and your shooting plan, uh, and expect that you're not going to get Kevin on the set until after lunch. So, okay, I did that. I got it all rearranged, and apparently Kevin might have had a couple of drinks too. Uh,
Oh,
I
no.
that I'm not long time ago. I'm not sure, but anyway, Kevin did not get any sleep. That's for that I do remember. He showed up, but he had not. He slept maybe an hour or two in the cell. However, being the professional that he is, Kevin had memorized all of his lines, and he had known he'd learned these lines backwards and forwards, a week or two in advance. So he just kind of kicked into automatic pilot. And it was like, okay, he was he was great. It turned out to not be that big of a deal.
Well,
And
in fact, I can see that enhancing his performance, just like bringing that energy and a little bit of rage.
maybe it did.
So,
Maybe
like,
it did.
because one of the hallmarks of a great Tales from the Crypt episode are big performances. This is the
Yes,
place where you want to go big. And I don't think he
exactly.
could have gone any bigger without bursting through the set like the Kool-Aid Man. Did
I,
you
I
ever have to pull him back and say, Kevin, just tone it down one notch? You're gonna
no, I don't ever remember. I don't ever. I just kind of wind up the toy and let it go. Um, and I do remember one moment he said, "Gee, I'm really good at playing an asshole, aren't I?"
yes. And that's another hallmark of a great Tales from the Crypt is someone that you just want to really, really hate, and you just can't wait
Yeah.
for them to get it. And he gets it. Did he get to keep his severed head?
Well, that's the next story I got to
Oh,
tell you
oh.
because that was a very interesting story. Um, for those of you who haven't seen the episode, you should stop listening to this podcast right now and go find it. I think you can find it on YouTube or somewhere. Um, watch the episode and then come back to the podcast because I don't want to ruin the ending if you haven't seen it. Okay, welcome back. uh, now you've seen the episode and you know that the payoff of all this is Kevin Dillon's severed head rolling down this flight of stairs. And one of the fraternity guys picks it up and says, of course, in proper EC tradition, "Good Lord." Now, I did this shot where I think it was the fraternity president that picks up the head, and it's a close up. And the guys that did that built this head, it was just fabulous. It was
Mhm.
fabulous. Well, so I put my cut of the show together, and all the executive producers take a look at it, and everybody's happy with everything except for Dick Donner. Dick Donner does not like the head. He just thought, um, end it, end it with the chainsaw sound effects coming from above. Uh, I guess, I guess he was trying to be classier or something. I don't know.
It's not the place for
uh,
classy.
That's exactly, exactly. So, I just kept annoying him. And finally he said, "Well, I guess it's okay to do the wide shot with the head rolling down the stairs." And I said, "Dick, everybody's got to see who it is." Everybody says, "No, you don't need that shot. I'm telling you, you don't need that shot." Okay, so I'm thinking about what am I going to do here? What am I going to do? I get the head, I get a gift box. I put the head in a gift box. I wrap it, put ribbon on it, and I have it delivered to Dick Donner. "Dear Dick, thank you for your support on this show." I wasn't there when he opened it, of course. He opens it up. He must have jumped 2 feet in the air. And then the phone rings. He says, "Okay, Gale, put the head in."
That's amazing. And this was probably at least a couple years before Seven came out. So you're really ahead of the game, they might say. No, this is like definitely a fan favorite. I mean, I don't have any data on that, but it's one that everyone like brings up as a classic episode. And it's one, even when I saw it as, probably middle school or whatever, it's one I very vividly remember because it's so relatable. Um and you got the guys impressing the girls, and you have that great gag with the Delta Omega Alpha.
Yeah.
Because every time I hear that, I'm like, oh, DOA, got it.
Yep, yep, yep.
The
Yeah,
all
and
ghouls
and
sorority.
yeah, and all the mechanics of it are all set up.
Mm-hmm.
The wall of shame, that it makes sense when you find out who the guy is in the cloak.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the nice things that that the actors came up with. There's a gag with Kevin and Peter DeLuise. Uh, Peter's got all the sound effects rigged in the house, in the haunted house, and all the other gags. And um, the severed arm comes flying out the window, and I think this is the gag where this happens, and um, Kevin says to Peter, "Great arm gag," and he says, "I didn't do it," and they look at each other and they just both of them go, like they're both funning each other. That moment was really something that they came up with.
Mm.
That was just a perfect button to that. I don't recall if I'd written anything beyond that, but that just made it really work beautifully. And that's why you got to get good actors and let them let them act and let them do what they know how to do.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like about this episode because it's a lot of like elevation and then kind of like something happens, but like, oh, is it real? Is it not? Oh, it's just the arm from like the cadaver lab, which I guess was
Right,
a common thing.
right.
So it's
Yeah,
like
they go
there's a lot
medical
of like
school. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot of like little elevations, and then okay, you go back down, and then you kind of it keeps ramping up in different ways. I really like that about this episode, where a lot
Thank
of the
you.
episodes are kind of like one big build to a
Right.
payoff. This one has lots of little payoffs kind of through because you have the quote guy dressed up as the coffer running around. You think
Yeah, the coffer. Right.
that's the main guy. Did whose coughing was that?
Boy, I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea. Whoever our sound guy was, our sound effects guy, I'm sure he came up with it.
Yeah. Um, are there any other fun stories from that shoot you want to share?
Well, I would just say that uh, I called up my friend Alan Silvestri and I said, "Hey, Al, can you score this for me?" He said, "For you, Bob, sure." Um, I said, "I can't pay you anything, you know." He said, "That's okay. That's okay. It's a Zemeckis show too. So yeah, you got it." So he came up with that, and I asked him to do a version of Brahms' Academic Festival
Oh yeah.
overture theme at the very beginning, the classic kind of alma mater's tune that everybody knows. And yeah, Al did a fantastic job. And say Rick Boda knew how to light that stuff.
Well, also
Great.
speaking of the sound effects, I noticed that some parts you can faintly hear like a heartbeat kind of happening, kind of in the it's kind of in the very back of the track. But I think it's like to kind of
Well,
pace you a little bit.
you always use that, you always use that to add tension when the guys are going up the stairs. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that's where it's in, where I'm using it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic episode that definitely stands the test of time.
Thank you.
All right, I want to move on to talk about some of your movies. And this is more of a general question, I'll get a little more specific. So, when I look at a lot of your movies, start with like "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in 1941, and then very literally in "Back to the Future," there's a theme of going back into the past to a specific time frame and kind of examining the zeitgeist, I guess you could call it, of a specific time or events. Why does that appeal to you?
Well, the appeal is simply, you know, we you start off with an idea. And the idea for I Want to Hold Your Hand was a bunch of girls trying to crash the Ed Sullivan show when the Beatles appeared, which was a big event when Bob and I were in junior high school. So it was something very dear to us, the whole Beatles thing and Beatles fandom. And so, I mean, that the period just comes out of that story. The same with 1941, we came across this incident of the false alarm air raid attack, which actually happened in 1942. And we just said to John Milius, who wanted to hire us to write a script for him, we said, "Hey, John, we know about this crazy thing that happened in L.A. in early 1942. We think that there could be, some insane kind of comedy to be done with that, and Milius knew about it. So those things just kind of came out of the idea. We didn't start with saying, I actually recently watched L.A. Confidential
Mm-hmm.
again, which is a fantastic movie,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't watched all the special features. And Curtis Hanson, the director, is talking about how what drew him to it was he really wanted to do Los Angeles in the 1950s movie. That was what he grew up, the period he grew up in, and the memories that he had, and he wanted to find a story that he could work in that time period. But we never looked at it that way. Back to the Future, yeah, it's most of it takes place in 1955, but when we made it, it was a contemporary movie. Marty McFly's in 1985, which is when the movie is released, and um, the idea of it, of course, is a kid goes back in time and ends up in high school with his parents. So when is he going to be able to? What year is it going to be when he does that? Well, you got to go 30 years. You got to go 30 years in the past. So there it is. And trespass, obviously, that doesn't have anything. It doesn't
Well,
have anything to do with any period. So um,
yeah.
it's the story it's a story. It's the concepts that grab us. The first script that we wrote, as I think was Bordello of Blood, and that was a contemporary. Uh, it was a contemporary story.
Mm-hmm.
We actually did a version of it where we changed it to the 50s, and we
Mm.
called it Fangs of 59.
Ooh, I like that. Well, I read a book about movies in the 80s, and one of the big themes that they talk about is a desire to go back and skip over the tumultuous 60s and early 70s back into the 50s, because that was a quote unquote seemingly simple, the Leave It to Beaver era, whether that was ever actually a true representation or not.
Well, one of the predictions that we made in Back to the Future Part 2 for 2015 was the Cafe 80s,
Yeah.
that there would be a Cafe 80s, because we thought, you know what, people are always nostalgic
Mm.
about the generation that was 30 years prior. So in the 80s, there was the Cafe 50s. So we figured in 2015 there would be the Cafe 80s. Now, I don't know whether somebody's got a Cafe 90s right now. It'd be interesting to look that up. And you're right. I don't remember there ever being like a Cafe 70s. Um, I don't know. It seems
There's
to me that they made lots of movies about the 60s and the counterculture.
Mhm.
Looking back at it, I mean, Aaron Sorkin did that Chicago 7 movie.
Right.
That was so. I think that what often happens, in my opinion, is that guys write these books and they're looking for some kind of a thread that connects stuff. And okay, they can find, you can find a whole bunch of stuff. But John Hughes movies were all contemporary when he made them,
Oh
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I've always pointed out to people, you can find more books written about John Ford and Alfred Hitchcock than
Mhm.
you can about William Wyler, because John Ford and Hitchcock, there's a thread that runs through their work. Hitchcock, obviously, what it is, and Ford, all the westerns that he did. And if you look at the work of William Wyler, uh, clearly one of the greatest directors ever. Um, you don't have that overt thing where you can say, yes, this is why it's a William Wyler movie. He was just a really good director. Um, Billy Wilder, a little bit like that too, although he's got this he's got this really strong sense of cynicism, even in his comedies.
Yeah.
Um,
Snark.
Bob and I learned an awful lot about screenwriting from watching Billy Wilder movies.
Yeah. I just want to go back for a second when you're talking about the 90s, because I was in high school in the 90s, and suddenly in the last couple of years, the '90s have definitely been the quote nostalgic range, at least as far as
Right.
like a lot of media. And it's really made me feel a bit older. I think when the music I grew up on is now like what oldies would have been, and
Right.
yeah, gosh, there was something I can't remember what it was, but there was some meme that was going around about like a certain event was closer to Pearl Harbor than it is now, or it's closer to now than it was to Pearl Harbor. And I was like, wow, that feels wrong.
Yeah, I hear you. I know it. I know what you mean by that.
All right, well let me get into this for a second. So during the pandemic, AMC had a deal where you could rent out a movie theater, and they gave you a list of movies you could choose. So I took my kids to see Back to the Future, just to show that to them for the first time. And normally they don't sit through a movie, and I figured, well, we'll have a whole movie theater to like fuss around in, and we can sit just my little family, and we can try to enjoy a movie. And from the second the guitar amp blows Marty to the side, they were falling over laughing, and they were hooked and enthralled the rest of the way. I've never seen them like that
Wow.
glued.
Cool. How old?
Seven, so
Wow.
7 year olds.
Okay.
So my question is, why do you think this movie is just so effective at captivating audiences across generations, across ages, probably across cultures?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons for it, depending on how old you are.
Mm,
But certainly by the time you're 7 or 8, um, there's a moment in everybody's life when they completely understand my parents were once kids.
mm,
It's a cosmic thing. It really is because, you think you're 5 years old and your parents are gods. They can do anything, whatever they say, and you can't imagine that they ever could have been anything else. But then at a certain point, you start to realize, wait a minute, these clothes that I was wearing last year, they don't fit me anymore. And my shoes don't fit. And when your parents are saying, well, when I was your age, and at some point it clicks, they were my age. And Back to the Future is a movie that really, you know, that that depicts that whole idea. The moment in the cafe when Michael J. Fox looks over at his father. There's the great shot that Bob designed where Crispin Glover is in George is in profile, and then you just kind of see Michael's face, Marty just
yeah.
coming behind his and with his jaw dropped open, and that is kind of the seminal moment where everybody gets what this movie where this movie's going,
Mm,
and it's just it doesn't matter how old you are, what culture you're in. It's something that you can relate to,
yeah.
because it's a very, very human thing.
Mm,
Everybody wants to know, what did my parents do on their first date? Um,
yeah.
let's face it. Maybe you don't want to know too much, but
Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because yeah, the core is that human story, but then you put the amazing performances and the effects, and then the great score
right,
all wrapping around it,
right.
lifting
And
it
then,
up.
and yeah, that dresses it all up really nicely. So, you know, we, we get your attention, like we got your kids' attention with the speaker blowing up at the beginning. And there's enough little crazy stuff going on where, the fact that your 7-year-old kids were able to sit through the exposition at the dinner table
Mhm.
scene, um, that's I mean, were they were able to sit through that exposition. Um, and it's it is the slow point in the movie, but you're just kind of aware that, okay, something is going on here. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to trust the filmmakers here that I'm in the hands of somebody that knows what they're doing.
Mhm.
And then the DeLorean appears, and nobody's getting up out of their seat.
You're literally off to the races. Now I know you've been asked questions about Back to the Future for almost 40 years now. Okay, I'm not even sure. So I posted to a Back to the Future Reddit group to see if people could come up with a question you haven't heard before. Okay. User United Fan 6191 asked, "What's the story behind 1985?" So this is Back to the Future 2. So 1985 Marty being at a boarding school in Switzerland. Was it because he set the living room rug on fire that prompted Biff to send them out? I mean, I understand story wise, yes, we can't have two Martys in the same place. But was that a callback to the?
Basically, we just needed to have a reason why the Marty of 1985A wasn't there.
Mhm.
We could not have two Martys. So we, the idea that, we came up with this idea, the idea that Biff would have him sent off to a boarding school that was about as far away as you could get from
Mhm.
Hill Valley, California. Just said, hey, I just want this kid's obnoxious. I can't stand him. We're sending him off to boarding school in Switzerland. So it had nothing to do with the rug catching on fire. It was a pragmatic thing to say,
Yeah.
what what are we going to say about Marty? In Back to the Future Part Two, we had we filmed, and I don't remember if it's in the deleted scenes or not. We filmed a scene where Marty ran into Dave, his older brother, who was a drunk, uh, kind of passed out on the steps of Biff's Casino or somewhere in that vicinity. And it was a nice scene, but we ended up cutting it out because Wendy Jo Sperber, who played his sister Linda, was pregnant at the time or was on maternity leave, whatever. She was like 9 months, 8 or 9 months pregnant, and she was not in any condition to shoot because we had conceived of a scene for her as well. And what we realized was that if the audience sees Dave McFly, but they don't see Linda, everybody's going to be wondering what happened to her. Why
Mhm.
why is she not in the movie? But so by not having Dave in it, it's a question that nobody asks.
Right. So has anyone ever asked you that question before about Switzerland?
No, it
Okay.
is new. It's new. Yeah.
We got one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of deleted scenes, this is from user Jamie Lex. Of all the material that didn't make it into the film, original ideas, deleted scenes, are there any you would have liked to see in the final product?
Not really. A lot of people say, well, when are you guys going to go back and do a director's cut? Uh, and we say, well, these are the director's cuts. These are the movies that we made after testing them with an audience to say, okay, we had these extra gags with Marty walking around in the town square and looking at some of the period details, but the stuff it slowed the movie down. So
Yeah.
we cut it out. We had this gag where George McFly isn't sure what time it is, so he goes into a phone booth at the dance to find out if it's how close it is to 9 o'clock to call the time and temperature. Um, and Dixon, the played by Courtney Games, locks him in the phone booth.
Mm,
And it was funny, but we just didn't need it.
right.
So there were about 7 minutes of cuts in the first movie. Um, the We cut virtually nothing out of Back to the Future 3. The only thing that we did a scene where you see uh, Mad Dog Tannen actually murder Marshall Strickland.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that one. That's sad.
It's
Right in front
gut
of his
wrenching. Yeah,
right in front of his
it's gut
kid.
wrenching. And his little kid is in tears. Yeah, it was really powerful. And it was so powerful. We said, we can't do this because, you know, Buford should die for doing that.
Mhm.
And we know we can't kill him off. So we just, we just had, we just had the deputy come and say, you're under arrest for robbing the Pine City stage. And what his actual full line was, for the murder of Marshall Strickland and for robbing the Pine City stage. So we trim that out so that you just say, okay, the marshal was somewhere else on that day, and nobody has a problem with that. So that was the only thing we cut out of part 3, and we cut out some little stuff out of part 2. The most interesting thing that we ended up cutting out was when Biff returns to 2015 after having stolen the DeLorean and going back to 1955. He staggers out of the DeLorean and he collapses. And the scene went on, and we actually see him being erased from existence.
Mm-hmm.
He completely disappears. And because we thought, okay, what Biff did by changing history and ended up causing his demise. We speculated that Lorraine got so pissed off with him, in the 1990s that she finally just shot him. But when we previewed it with that scene in it, the audience was completely lost because at that point they didn't know that Biff had changed history. Right. So we just cut that part of it out, and he staggers out of the time machine and collapses, and everybody just says, oh, he's, the strain of time travel made him collapse, and that was the end of it, and it worked fine.
All right. What's the verdict? Have you heard that question before?
I'm sorry, which was the question?
If there were any deleted scenes or ideas that you wish.
Yeah. People have asked that before. Okay. Would we ever put something back in? No, we would not.
Let's see. We'll do this one. Okay, this is from user Optimax. This is a really obscure one. I'm very curious about this. Was there a specific reason why the rehydrated pizza was half green peppers and the other half pepperoni, rather than mixing them up?
No, that's never been asked. That's never been asked. Well, all I can pretend to remember, at least, is that back in those days, it was a big deal that you could go to Pizza Hut and get a half and half pizza. That somebody might not like green peppers, or somebody might not like sauce or pepperoni, so you could just get it half and half like that. So we thought it was a cool visual anyway.
Oh, that's one of those things, again, as a kid, you're like, whoa. I was curious if it was like a red and green color thing, like you couldn't mix them too much, or they wanted to have them on different sides. If there's like some color theory behind it.
I mean, if you had gone into a Pizza Hut in those days, you could order a half and half pizza and it would come out looking like that. Mm-hmm. We actually had from Pizza Hut, they sent a pizza, one or two. There might have been two of these guys, or they could have been women. Pizza stylists. When you do a food commercial, they have these people that are there, and their job is to make the food really look good.
Yeah, I've read about that.
Yeah, so that they were there, and they were spraying whatever they did on the cheese, like, to make sure it
or something
all melty and stuff. Yeah.
And my favorite is that they use like shaving cream instead of whipped cream, because whipped cream will dissipate and shaving cream will hold it.
Right. They use mashed potatoes instead of vanilla ice cream. Yeah.
Oh. All right. This one you probably heard, but I like it a lot. So this was from Acco 1931. Which scenes still make you laugh and/or bring you the most joy from the movies?
Well, that's a very good question. That really is.
Have you heard it before?
Well, people often ask me what was my favorite moment in filming the movies, but no, I don't know that anybody's asked me what is your favorite bit in the movie. I will tell you that one of my favorite things in a movie that never gets a laugh, never, is when Doc Brown is demonstrating how the time machine works, and he's saying, or you could go back and witness the birth of Christ, and the time display shows December 25th, 0000. Yeah. Nobody laughs at that, and I think that's really funny.
That's I did pick up on that. So I'm curious, like, if you want to go past, is there a negative spot they're supposed to do?
Yeah, well, we decided, okay, you don't. How do you go back to the Jurassic
Yeah.
period? I don't know.
Yeah, like my
But
dad always said that if he could go back in time, he'd want to go to the splitting of the Red Sea. That was his thing. He wants to see that event.
well, Woody Allen said you don't ever want to go back to a period of time before indoor plumbing.
If you, here's one from me. If you could go back in time or forward in time, where would you want to go?
Well, this is a good parlor game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, for those of you listening that work in companies where you have new employees and you're just kind of
Mm-hmm.
trying to get everybody to know each other. Um, it's a good question to ask. And you say you have one trip that you can take for personal reasons and one trip that you can take for historic reasons. And it's important for everybody to write down the answer before they speak, because a lot of times people say it and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's something I never thought of."
Yeah.
You could go back and see you could go back and see the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. I
Mm-hmm.
never thought about using a time machine to go back and see a performance. You go back and see the premiere performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, or The Sound of Music, or something like that. Um, so my personal thing would be that my mom was a professional violinist,
Hmm.
and after World War II, she had a nightclub act called Maxine and Her Men. She had a little ensemble. She was on the violin. She had a little band of 4 or 5 players, and they played in clubs and hotels in the St. Louis area. And I would like to go back in time and catch her act.
That's awesome.
That I would really love to do that. And my historic thing, I used to always say, well, I would go back to Dallas, November
Mm.
1963, and look at the grassy knoll instead of looking at the motorcade, and find out how many guys actually were on the grassy knoll, if there was anybody on the grassy knoll. But I think those of us that have studied that incident are kind of dead set sure that there was at least one shooter there.
So let me
But
get this straight. You wouldn't try to stop the event. You just want to see how it happened.
well, we already know that when you try to change
I know.
history, there's always there's always repercussions, and whether you can do it or not. Um, which, by the way, was one of the coolest things that we figured out in Back to the Future, which was we did change history, but the only history we changed was the history of the McFly family.
Mm.
Everybody else's history was the same. So
Well, and
you know,
Biff,
yeah, yeah. But I mean,
but within that, yeah.
as a viewer, you weren't coming back. You weren't walking out of the theater saying, "Well, wait a minute, you know, Hitler won World War II," or some shit like that. It was always okay. Yeah, the McFly family has improved, and actually Biff has improved too. As somebody once pointed out, Biff is now, his own boss and an entrepreneur. He may be a sleazy one, but at least he's out of the corporate food chain, and that's got to be that's got to be a good thing.
So
Um,
so Chuck Berry was popular in all timelines.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm sure I could ask plenty of questions, but one more. Why Johnny Be Good? Was there a reason behind that specifically, or was it licensing?
No, it had nothing to do with licensing. It was, we kicked around a couple of ideas, and I was the one that said it's got to be Johnny Be Good, because it's arguably the greatest rock and roll song ever written. At least it would be in the top five. I mean, they put it on the gold record that's on the Voyager spacecraft,
Yeah.
right? So that's the one rock and roll song that was on there.
Mm-hmm.
So, we we kind of know that, all right, if aliens actually ever find that and they figure out how to listen to it, and they listen to Johnny Be Good, and then they intercept some signal of Back to the Future being broadcast, and they watch it, they say, "Oh yeah, we get together."
What other songs were considered?
Well, Rock Around the Clock was something we
Mm.
thought about for about 10 seconds, but we said, all right, wait, They're using that on Happy Days.
Yeah.
Everybody's heard that too many times. It was used in Blackboard Jungle. That was the title music in
Hmm.
Blackboard Jungle. And we just thought that's kind of, and it's not really a quintessential rock and roll song. It's a good period song. Blue Suede Shoes was something we thought about. Um, but at the end of the day, we said, all right, the father of rock and roll is Chuck Berry. And not honor Chuck Berry with one of his songs.
Hmm.
That was criminal, you know. We
Yeah.
can't do Hound Dog, you know. Okay, yeah, it's a great song, but it's got to be Chuck Berry. It's got to be him.
Yeah.
So, and of course, when we went to Chuck loved the joke because a lot of people say, well, you know, what are you guys doing saying that a white kid taught Chuck Berry how to play Johnny Marr?
Right.
It's a joke, dude.
Yeah.
It's a joke, you know? And Chuck Berry thought it was funny. And if he thinks it's funny, you ought to think it's funny too. Because if he had a problem with it, he would have said, well, okay, you can use my song, but you can't do that gag. But no, he loved the gag. He said, okay, yeah, great, great. Because he saw it as an homage to him, which is exactly the way we intended
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for indulging me in some Back to the
it.
Future conversation.
Sure,
But
sure.
I want to turn to your comic career, which doesn't get enough recognition. So tell me about transitioning to writing comics. What was easier? What was more challenging?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, an interesting story of how
Hmm.
somebody contacted me and said, "Hey, you want to write some comics?" Because I'd done a lot of interviews where I talked about the importance of my reading comics growing up and how that was a huge influence. And I'd gotten my first thing I ever had published was a letter to the editor in Tales of Suspense number 98. So for you comic collectors out there, it's the one that has Captain America and the Black Panther on the cover. And you go in the letter page, and there's my first thing got published. Um, so out of the blue, I got a phone call from a guy named Jordan Gorfinkel, who's one of the editors of Batman, and this would have been in the late 1990s or maybe the early 2000s. And he said, Bob, I understand you're a big comics fan and you've always said good things about Batman. He said, would you be interested in participating in what we call the Bat Summit? Actually, let me go back. It was they first offered me. They said we're doing these text stories in. I think the title of the book was Batman Chronicles. Um, and they said, would you consider writing a Batman text story? And we'll get somebody good to illustrate. And they did. They got Bill Sienkiewicz to illustrate this. And it was called To See the Batman. And I've been heavily influenced by the series Marvels that Kirk Busiek did with Alex Ross. Uh, it's a fabulous series, and it's the history of the Marvel Universe told from the point of view of an ordinary guy who just, he looks out his window and he sees Galactus and the Silver Surfer coming down to Earth. That's a really cool way to do it. So I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do a story where there's this high school kid and his ambition is to see Batman because there's another kid in his school who had Batman show up chasing a criminal and busted up his greenhouse in the back, his parents' greenhouse in the backyard, and this guy became like a minor celebrity because he saw Batman. So this kid decides he's going to go out and he's going to try to get a photo of Batman, and that'll make him even a bigger celebrity than this other kid. So he starts going out in the middle of the night on his bicycle, going to the worst parts of town and hoping to see Batman. It's a cute little story. So then they invited me to participate in the Bat Summit, and the Bat Summit was what they had to kind of plan the trajectory of Batman for the next 6 months. And they just done this series where Gotham City got leveled by an earthquake.
Hmm.
I forget what the subtitle of the
Was it?
series
I
was.
think it's No Man's Land or something like
No,
that.
No Man's Land was what followed this.
Oh, okay.
So No Man's Land was what they were planning. And Jordan said, it'd be good to get somebody who is not, so steeped in comics continuity to offer some suggestions and ideas and thoughts, but who's already a Batman fan. And I said, well, it just so happens that I'm going to be in New York at the time you're doing this. So yeah, I'd love to participate in this. So this is where we started No Man's Land. We kind of it's a 1 year trajectory,
Hmm.
and we worked out the first 6 months. And then after I got back to California, I had three of the Batman editors get on the phone together to persuade me that you have to write the opening book. You have to do this, Bob. Nobody else can do it. So, okay, I was flattered. Um, and the cool thing about this first issue of No Man's Land is Batman isn't even in it.
Nice.
It really kind of sets the whole world. And everybody loved it. And they got Alex Maleev. I think this was his first work at DC Comics. Um, and it was interesting. I'm trying to remember, did I script the whole first four episodes? I think I did. The first four books of that were mine, yeah. And my comic book writing style was very loose because I figured let the artist come up with stuff that I
Hmm.
couldn't think of. But what I would always do is I would write all the dialogue and I would say this scene needs to be 2 pages or this scene needs to be 4 pages. And I'd say this is what happens. Here's all the dialogue. Figure it out. Because I knew the artist needed to know the dialogue to make sure there was room in the panels to put the dialogue. And I thought that would be a good, comfortable way for an artist to work. Well, Alex was kind of new to this because he was from Eastern Europe, and he was just not used to having such a loose kind of style. And so some of his pencils came back and they didn't really make any sense. So then I had to go back and say, okay, I've got to break this down panel by panel. And Orf he understood my frustration at this. So he said, I want you to come back and write another book in this series, and I'm going to get Phil Winslade to illustrate it. And Phil will be perfect working with your loose style, and he'll be able to come up with some stuff that you wouldn't think of. And Phil did. He was a prince, and so that was a one-off issue. And then once these Batman books started coming out, then I get a call from Joe Quesada at Marvel
Hmm.
and saying, Bob, we want you to write for us too. And I said, okay. Um, and I think the first thing I wrote for them was this Antman special called Antman's Big Christmas, which happens to be actually my favorite thing I've written for comics. It's really kind of twisted and subversive. And originally their intention was that they were gonna do this in the giant comic format that was real popular at the time. So the idea that Ant-Man would be in this gigantic, huge size comic was cool. But they decided they weren't going to do that anymore. And I said, look, I'm not up on all the Avengers continuity and all the Ant-Man continuity. So I need this story to kind of exist a little bit outside of the continuity so that I can write the characters the way that I know them. So it starts with a couple pages of Ant-Man with the Avengers, and it's Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne. It's not Scott Lang and whoever the Wasp is with him. I based all these characterizations on the versions of the characters that Stan Lee used to write. And the story was that the Avengers are opening up their fan mail and it's getting to be close to Christmas and they're deciding, you know what, we ought to each answer some Christmas wish that some kid writes in. So this kid writes in that Christmas is always ruined for him because his father agreed to a dying wish by his mother that he would invite their family over for Christmas every year. His mother couldn't stand the family. And would there be anything that Antman could do to, to deal with this? And Hank Pym is thinking, yeah, you know what? My family was a bunch of jerks. Um, I didn't like going to Thanksgiving. Yeah, let's go visit. Let's do this one. Let's do this one. And they get to the kid's house, and you know, the he's got an uncle that sniffs the kid's mother's underwear, and I mean it's
Oof.
all this, and somebody else that's smoking, constantly smoking cigars. And so Ant-Man figures out a way to basically terrorize terrorize these horrible relatives. So they're not going to be interested in ever coming back to any family events at this kid's house. But there's one last. He has these extra doses of shrinking gas that he uses to, he shrinks this guy down and puts him in a box that's full of all kinds of trash and garbage and vapors, so that he can understand what it's like to smell cigar smoke. Anyway, there was one last thing, and he's able to use it to give his parents. He uses to give the kids' parents, you know, shrink them down so they can ride on his father's electric train set,
Mm.
and it's a real nice little ending. And so, comic fans out there, go dig it up on eBay or whatever. It's they were Marvel was a little bit. It's like, Gail, you really doing this? Because it is subversive, and there's some perversity in it. But I
Mm.
said, yeah, come on, let's do this. Let's be crazy about this. Then later on, when Marvel hires me to be in the group of guys that are running Spider-Man for a couple of years, this is um, Brand New Day, when they unmarried Spider-Man to kind of reboot the continuity. So I came up with this character, and I was pissed off that they decided to kill him off. But I came up with this character called the Bookie
Mm,
because I
yeah.
thought, okay, we're having all these superhero battles all the time
Hmm.
throughout the Marvel universe. There's got to be some bookies out there that are, you know, taking bets on, who's gonna win when Iron Man and the Hulk fight each other. What are the odds that you give me, when Thor fights the Thing? So I said this could be a really cool character who's always out there hustling for, superhero, supervillain battles. Well, and I wanted him to smoke cigars because that's what he would do, right? And at this point, the prudes running Marvel Comics said, "Oh, gee, we don't want to depict smoking anymore. I mean, come on, Nick Fury without a cigar? Give me a break,
Yeah.
right?" I said, look, I'm not depicting smoking in a positive way. I'll even do some cancer jokes and stuff to make it clear that this is not a good thing to do. But people smoke, everybody knows that. And it's ridiculous that we don't depict it. And it's what's the problem with depicting this in a way that is not romantic? It's not a Bogart movie. It's a trashy guy called the Bookie.
Yeah.
So I ended up appealing this to somebody higher up at Marvel, and they finally said, "Yeah, okay, all right, we'll go ahead and do it." And I
Yeah.
think I was the only guy. Well, I think being Bob Gale helped me out a little bit there, because I don't know that anybody else was ever able to show anybody smoking.
Yeah, that's interesting. 'Cause I was reading some of the comics online last night, and that bookie even like starts off in quote the villains bar, whatever they call it, the bar with no name that's just full of villains. It's like, oh yeah,
Right,
this is
right,
obviously not a quote nice guy.
right.
Unfortunately, your Ant-Man comic, it was not on the Marvel digital app. but I did read your Daredevil series, the 6 issues you did in '98,
Right,
and that was
right.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
Yeah, it was just such an easy idea that I was surprised nobody had ever done. You know,
yeah, so
Matt Murdock has to sue Daredevil.
yeah,
How cool is that?
for
Yeah.
property damage.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Um,
And the great Phil Winslade came on board and he illustrated four of the six books. Did a
yeah,
fabulous job. Yeah.
and what's even more interesting is that like there's barely any actual Daredevil action in it. It's really like a John Grisham story.
Yeah.
It's a court battle between where Matt's trying to play both sides, where he has to work for the prosecution as Matt Murdock, and he's working as the with the defense as Daredevil. And there's a great line where he says, two identities means twice as much trouble. So I have
And
two
it took
questions.
forever. It took forever for them to for them to put that in a trade paperback. And
Mhm.
again, part of this was I was never really down with what who's the writer that turned Daredevil into Batman?
Oh, Frank
Um,
Miller.
yeah, Frank Miller.
Mhm.
I I I love Frank Miller. I love what he did with Batman, and his stories were always really good. But every time I read his Daredevil stuff, I said, "This is a guy that really wants to be doing Batman." And having grown up on the Stan Lee version of Daredevil, to me, I totally understood the character. Here is a guy who, unlike most superheroes, his real identity is the guy when he puts on the suit,
Right.
um, because that's the only time he can be free. He can use he can't he has to pretend like he's a blind man, um, and then when he puts on the costume, he doesn't have to be that guy anymore. And he's once he's in the costume, he's cracking wise and he's doing crazy stuff, and he's calling himself Daredevil, and it's a red suit. And this is a guy that wants attention. He's not wearing a dark, gray suit like Batman because he's a creature of the night. He's wearing a bright red suit
Yeah.
because he wants to have fun. And so, I said to Joe, I said, look, that's the iteration of character that I understand. I just don't understand Frank Miller's take on the character. Even though the fans may love that, um, I can't, I can't get my head wrapped around why he would be that way, given, given his history.
Yeah.
So, Joe said, okay, write it. This is Marvel Knights, and every creator gets, 6 or 8 issues to do something, and they're going to be understandably a little bit different from each other. And if that's the version of Daredevil you want to write it.
Were you given like a plot, like a very basic plot idea, or like an end place and the start place? Or
No, no. In fact, what I really wanted to do, the reveal at the end is that the villain is the ringmaster.
Mhm.
I wanted it to be Doctor Doom because I
Mm,
knew Daredevil had a history with Doctor Doom. And I actually thought that it would be cool as a setup for, a giant, one of these giant mega events that Doctor Doom would be able to implant false memories in people and totally wreak havoc with the Marvel universe that way.
right.
So I had this whole vision of doing that. Um, but they said, no, you can't do that because whoever's writing the Fantastic Four, whatever, they have other plans for
Right.
Doctor Doom. You can't go there. And and that kind of harkened back to what happened with the end of No Man's Land because it didn't end the way I'd wanted to end, and I didn't get to go back. I didn't go back for the second Bat Summit to talk through the second half because DC was too cheap to buy me a plane ticket. I'd flown there, I'd been there on vacation with my family, take my kid to New York for the first time. I said I can take off a day and do this. But they said, we want you to come back and participate in the Bat Summit. I said, I'd love to. You're gonna cover my travel, right? They said, well, no. And I said, well, guys, come on. I'm not gonna lay out a couple $100 to fly there on my own dime for you guys to get the benefit of my talent and my wisdom here. So
Right.
I said, okay, I respectfully decline. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And the idea, the idea that I had as the payoff for No Man's Land, and it's sort of there, but it's not as good as it should have been, was that they had always the editors always said there's got to be this mystery villain kind of operating in the background, pulling strings and doing stuff. And when they started laying this out, they didn't know who the mystery villain was going to be. And finally, I said, well, it's got to be Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor should be buying up Gotham City because nobody's in there, knowing that at some point it is going to be back in part of the United States and Luthor will own it. And everybody thought, God, that's a fucking great idea. Well, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. But then by the time it was time to do that, whoever was doing Superman at the time, they were doing some other stuff with Lex Luthor, and I don't even remember how it ended, if Luthor is tied into it or not. But that was my vision of it, and an alternate, maybe it happened in an alternate universe.
But I've got two quick questions that I want to
Okay.
ask. Let's cover our traditional ending questions. In Walter Hill's episode, The Man Who Was Death, William Sadler walks into a diner and asks for a cheese sandwich. If you were going to walk into a diner and ask for a cheese sandwich, what kind of cheese would you want?
Me?
You.
Well, it also depends what country I'm in, because if you ask for provolone cheese in the UK, you're not going to get it. They don't even know. They don't even know what you're talking about. Um, I'd probably ask for a grilled cheese sandwich with cheddar cheese.
Right.
Go completely traditional. Yeah.
Traditional last question is, we're dads from the crypt, and we know Tales From The Crypt loves to give out advice to the youngsters. So, as a father, as a mentor, what advice would you like to give our audience?
The weird advice that I always give to people is learn how to deal with rejection, because rejection is a huge part of everybody's life, and nobody really talks about it enough. It can be devastating, and I put it in the context of Back to the Future because the project was rejected over 40 times. And if Bob Zemeckis and I believed what the people were telling us about why this movie would never get made and so forth, if we believed that, we would have never gotten it made.
Right.
So you have to be able to say to yourself, okay, as Jennifer says to Marty in the movie, Marty, one rejection isn't the end of the world. And 40 rejections isn't the end of the world either. So yeah, you're going to get rejected. Everything you do, somewhere you're going to get rejected. Is it by, the person that you want to go out with? Is it by somebody you want to be friends with? Is it by the college you're trying to get into? Is it by some club that won't let you in? Whatever it is, you're going to get rejected. Okay, it's human. It's everybody everybody goes through it, and don't let it make you miserable, because there'll always be something else. I remember reading a really interesting study. This was many, many years ago. And it was at the time when my daughter was applying to college, which is, okay, this is get ready for rejection, folks. And somebody done a study about what happened to the kids that didn't get to go to their first or second choice schools because they were rejected and ended up going to their third or fourth or fifth choice schools. Were the kids happy? And the answer was yes, they were. They were, because we're human beings. We're very resilient creatures, and we learn to make the best out of the situation that we're in. And so, yeah, okay, I didn't get into Harvard. I went to, University of Massachusetts instead. I went to, Miami of Ohio, whatever college was your, third or fourth or fifth choice, or even your last choice, you learn how to make friends, you learn how to take classes, and you make something of it, and it's fine, and you end up happy, and you can end up being just as successful by going to one of those colleges as you would have been if you went to your first or second choice.
I love it. All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming on. This was a true honor and a blast. Where can people find you?
Well, I'm not on social media,
Do you have a
because
website?
I'm more on the anti-social media thing. Because if I was on social media, I'd be so busy answering folks that
Yeah.
I wouldn't get anything done. So, um, you know, backtothefuture.com,
Mhm.
run by my good friend Stephen Clark. Uh, they always know where my personal appearances are going to be. Put in a big plug for Back to the Future the musical, which has been playing for 2 years in London, and we open on Broadway for previews on June 30th. Um, it's Back to the Future as a musical comedy. It's really great. I know there are a lot of people say, "Oh God, I wouldn't be caught dead in a musical." We have had a lot of those people show up in London, and turn around and say, "Wow, am I glad that I showed up at this one because this exceeded all my expectations." So, um, as the guardian and gatekeeper of Back to the Future, I want to assure all fans that you're not going to be disappointed in Back to the Future the musical. It is Back to the Future. It's not woke to the future. It's Back to the Future. We didn't ruin your childhood. You're going to have a wonderful time. So I'm going to be there, hanging out, rehearsals and previews. So if you're in New York, maybe you can track me down. And in terms of me doing signings and convention appearances, just watch backtothefuture.com, because I show up at these things every once in a while, and you can buttonhole me there, if you find me.
All right. Well, that wraps things up. I appreciate everyone for listening. And with that, I thank you for listening to Dads from the Crypt.
Thank you, Jason. Pleasure.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.